All right, so we're in Proverbs chapter 6. Proverbs chapter 6, if you'd like to open your Bible there. Proverbs 6. There's a handout. We're going to be covering a lot of just practical things this morning. So there's a handout somewhere in the back by Brian. If you'd like to grab one, we'll be going over it. So a lot of the things we're going to cover this morning, and all likelihood in our next class as well. It's just practical advice. It's not, thank you, Coleman. A lot of practical advice. It's not going to be gospel truth. So, you can take it or leave it. What we find here is a lot of good advice for life, making decisions. A man was asked if he had a good description of life, and his response was, "Life is the struggle to keep death at a respectable distance." Interesting description about life. And his point was, life is serious, that we have to push back. We have to put forth some effort in what we do, the decisions we make. We can't just give in. That life is serious. And of course, there's a time for levity, for entertainment, for just enjoying ourselves. There's a time for that, of course. But there's also a time to be serious about things, focused about things. If you desire to do well and be well, then you have to have that balance. You have to be willing to be serious about life. The instruction, the growth, the advice that's contained in this book about all kinds of issues, and we're going to be looking at financial issues this morning mainly, and depending on how far we get, we might get into some morality issues. All the advice in this book only benefits those who will use it. Who will avail themselves to this information and actually use it. Those who sleep in on Sunday, those who do not prepare themselves, those who will not avail themselves to this information will be poor for it. And again, I understand there's some people who have a good reason for not being here. Again, they're sick. Things happen. Sometimes there's an emergency, things out of our control. I was actually, as a couple weeks back, I was on my way to church, and my tire just blew out. And, Lee was able to come and help me eventually, and I ran over a house key. Can you believe that? We finally pulled, I thought it was a nail or something. Typically it's usually a nail or a screw. It was a house key. I ran over a house key and it punctured my tire. And, it went flat. It wasn't like, well, I can keep on driving. It was dead. I had to get a completely new tire. Things happen. That's just life. So I understand there's some people who can't be here for good reasons. But some people just, again, sleep in. It's not a priority for them. And so I'm thankful for everyone here this morning, and I commend you for being here this morning because you've showed up. You have the level of commitment to take God's Word seriously. And again, I'm thankful for you. One man has said this, and I've heard different versions of this, and I like the way he phrased it. This is just, a man's saying, it's not scripture or anything. And he said, successful people do what unsuccessful people are not willing to do. Don't wish it were easier, wish you were better. And again, if you have your Bible, I'd encourage you to open it with me to Proverbs 6. As we look at Proverbs 6, as we look at all the advice and the things that the Bible prescribes, the Bible does not teach us to ease through life. The Bible teaches you what tenets to adopt so you can be successful in life. And there's a big difference between those two things. And so we find some of these tenets, these practical things in Proverbs 6. Proverbs chapter 6. And in Proverbs 6, we find practical lessons about business, about morality, and about fornication. Jesus said, "He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. And so he talks about, the small decisions that we make. That if we're faithful in the least, if we're faithful in the small things, that affects our faithfulness in bigger things. We can all be faithful in the small things today. We could all save $10 today. We could eat an apple or some healthy food, vegetables today. We could all, get a good stretch and go for a walk today. We can clean a room in our house today. We could read a chapter of the Bible today. We could pray for 5 minutes today. And if we're faithful, if we're serious in these small things, then we can build from there and allow that to have a positive impact on the bigger parts of our life. If we're serious about these small issues, we can, again, be faithful in the bigger things. And Jesus says the reverse is true, that if we're not faithful in the small things, then we're really not going to be all that faithful in the bigger things. And so may our study of Proverbs 6 this morning give you the information that you need to push back against all the things in this world that are going to bring, corruption and decay into your life. So again, we're covering a lot of practical things. We're going to be talking about money a little bit this morning. Again, if you didn't get a handout, there's a handout somewhere in the back that we'll be going over later on. So we're going to start in Proverbs 6, and we're going to read verses 1 through 11. Proverbs 6, verses 1 through 11. And here we find practical advice about business. Practical advice about business dealings. So Proverbs 6, starting with verse 1, it says, "My son, if thou be a surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth. Thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. Do this now, my son, and deliver thyself. When thou art come into the hand of thy friend, go, humble thyself, and make sure thy friend. Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man." So, backing up to verses 1 and 2, we find here some information about financial agreements. Verses 1 and 2, information about financial agreements. And what is said in verses 1 and 2 here is about entering into some kind of promise, some kind of financial agreement, and the obligations that come with it. Now, the King James might use some old-fashioned language, a different version. Looking at verse 1, a different version says, "My child, if you've put up security for a friend's debt, or agreed to guarantee the debt of a stranger." And then the thought continues in verse 2. So this is talking about debt. This, again, is talking about some kind of financial agreement. And when we look at verse 2, there's a general principle that we should keep our promises. If we have a friend, a family member, someone who is part of our life, and we agree to let them borrow money or whatever it is, some kind of financial agreement, the general idea in verse 2 is we should keep our promises. We should keep our word. Again, verse 1 talks about, in the King James says, you've stricken your hand with a stranger. Today we'd say something like you shook on it. Again, this is an agreement. This is an official agreement between two people. Now, I think most people today, when we look at these verses, these verses would likely have application concerning our dealings with banks, for those who get them credit cards, mortgages, these kinds of financial agreements. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Way back in time, I picked a young man up that had car trouble. And he was from South Carolina, North Carolina, I don't remember. And he said, well, just take me down to Atlanta. He's going down to Atlanta. And so I dropped him off in Atlanta at a market. Because he said he knew friends and blah, blah, blah. So I did that. I gave him $20 just to help him out. Well, my phone number. Mm-hmm. Then a few days later, I got a phone call. He was in jail in Atlanta because he had tried to either stole or he tried using credit cards from somebody. Mm-hmm. Long story short, when he was in jail, then he needed somebody to sign bond to get him out of jail. Well, I didn't want to do that. Then if I was to sign bond for him and he didn't show up, then I would be liable for that money.
Yeah.
Luckily, Georgia will not the parents could not put up bond because they were in North Carolina. And so they needed a Georgia person to put up bond for this Georgia jail. And I wouldn't do it because I didn't want to be held liable for someone I had no idea. But that's another situation where you're putting your,
Yeah, I think it's a good choice. I think that was a wise choice. Being kind to someone doesn't mean, ruining your own life to help them out, especially if it's, a stranger. You give him a ride and $20, I think was help enough, for him to go and get in a bunch of trouble. I mean, that's all on him, So yeah, there's a situation where, these words would have some application. And so the general idea, like what, Bart just mentioned, is, when you're signing your name to something, when you're agreeing to something, the general idea in verse 2 is that we should keep our word. We should keep our promises.
Well, like verse 2 there says, you have been trapped by what you said. Mm-hmm. So if I'd have signed that, then I would have been obligated, trapped by that agreement.
Yep. And that's, generally when you, are signing a contract for, I don't know, some kind of loan or something. I mean, that's the whole reason there's accountability, that if, you're not living up to your end of the agreement, you might end up in court or something. And so, these words, again, they are, relevant even today. In verses 3 through 5, we have advice concerning debt. In verses 3 through 5, advice concerning debt. What does he say about debt? What advice does he give in these verses?
Free yourself.
Free yourself, right? And what are some ways he describes how we should work for that freedom? Is it casual?
You don't rest.
You don't rest, right? And of course, there's some poetic language here. In verse 5, it basically says, don't sleep until you get out of your debt. Now, of course, we can't take that literally, because if you literally just stop sleeping, you'd be dead, right? So the point is there's an emphasis here on urgency, right? You should get out of debt as quickly as possible. Verse 5, it says, deliver thyself as the roe from the hand of the hunter, right? So it's like you're a deer and you're being hunted by a hunter. And you should, get out of that dangerous situation as quickly as possible, again, is the idea. So if you are in debt, again, the advice given here is get out of it as quickly as possible. And I think we could take that a step further and say, and if it's possible, again, this is just advice. This isn't like your soul's at risk, or it's a matter of salvation. This is just, I think, good advice, practical advice. But we could take this a step further and say, if it's possible for you, avoid debt altogether. Avoid getting into debt to begin with. And I think there's probably, in our society, there's a few exceptions to that. And we'll talk about that. But there's a lot of ways, again, if we could just avoid debt altogether, I think our lives will be better for it. So a lot of practical advice is given in this section here. We're going to be talking about a lot of practical things this morning. And I think maybe sometimes we think of Well, there's practical teaching and there's spiritual teaching. And I think that's true, but also in a certain sense, I think it's all the same. Because what we're reading the Bible, isn't the Bible a spiritual book? And everything is connected. Every choice we make in our life is connected. Just for example, let's say there's a brother in Christ, and his financial situation is just awful. It's just in ruins, and he's worried about if he can pay his rent on time or mortgage or whatever he does. He's worried about paying his bills. He's wondering if he has enough money for groceries. And now he's bringing all that baggage and all that thought to church on Sunday. If he even has the mindset that he needs to go to church because he's so stressed out. And what's his worship going to be like on Sunday? What's his giving going to be like if again he's even able to give as part of his worship? What's his giving going to be like on Sunday? So this is all connected. Just because we're going to be covering some practical things this morning, it doesn't mean it's completely void of spiritual content or it doesn't affect our spiritual life. Everything is connected. All our choices, if we want to categorize them as practical choices versus spiritual choices, that's all connected. All right. Have you ever heard of rent to own? Rent to own. And I'm going to go through a quick little, again, practical lesson here, and it will apply to all kinds of things. If you ever heard of rent to own, and again, in my opinion, my advice, and again, from what we see here in chapter 6, getting involved in this kind of thing, and if you could avoid it, you'd be better if you could avoid it. So I have here up on the screen, this is copy and pasted from a rent to own business. And if you never heard for rent to own, this is a business where you can rent or lease furniture, electronics, different things to furnish your home. And then you rent it for a certain period of time, and then at the end of the agreed period of time, if you make all your payments, you get to own what you're renting. That's why it's called rent to own. And so here I have the example of a TV. Through this business, you can lease a TV. I found a smart TV, and if you can see up on the screen, if you look at right in the middle, it gives the cash price for this TV. It's listed, and I'm just going to round up to $775. That's the cash price for this TV. So you can go in, you make a small down payment. What's it say, $5? You slap down a $5 bill, you can take this, $750 TV home. And then you make this is for a 24-month agreement. You pay $55 every month, and then at the end of 2 years, you own this TV. All right, and this would apply again to anything you can get from this business: furniture, other electronics, things like that. And maybe you're saying, well, I know this is, I shouldn't be doing this, or I'm not interested in TV, or maybe something like that. Well, what I'm about to walk through applies to almost any financial agreement where you're going to be paying interest on something, where you're buying something essentially on credit and paying interest. So this would apply to, if you pay a mortgage, it's basically the same idea. Some of the numbers might change, the percentages might change, but it's essentially the same thing. If you pay a car payment, this is essentially the same thing. You can pay a car payment with interest. So with this, again, returning to this example of this TV, with this agreement, after all your payments are made, and it shows you up on the screen, you would own this TV for $1,320. Okay? So that's if you made this agreement, you did all your payments, every month, you would own this TV out eventually for $1,320. So again, notice the price difference here. If you just showed up and paid the full amount, if you just paid in cash, it's $775 compared to $1,320. So with this rent-to-own agreement, you end up paying almost double, right? Close to double the original price of this TV set. And again, this would apply to anything. It would apply if you want to go there and get a couch or a chair or whatever this. I've never actually been in one of these businesses because I don't even know why they're still in business, honestly. I don't know how people have the mindset to go there. It's just like, to me, it's just like flushing your money down the toilet. But anyways, that's just my opinion. Take it or leave it. So why would you pay almost, double for something like this? Well, with a convenience item like a TV, the only reason you pay more is a lack of patience, right? Because the $55 payment a month, not only are you paying a small amount on this TV that you're buying, but the rest of that money is, taxes and, interest that you're paying to the business. Basically, you're paying the business for giving you this TV right away. Giving it to you the same day for that $5 bill. So you're paying this business almost double what this TV's worth for them giving it to you right away. So instead of paying this business $55 every month, which includes interest, you could just wait. Pay yourself $50 a month, and then eventually you just go to any store and find a TV you like or a similar one, and you just buy it in cash. And the money that you would have saved in the long run, you can put towards anything else. If you need to buy a couch, if you need to put it in your savings, or make a payment on some bills or whatever, you would save. Again, how much would you save? You'd save over $500. If you just purchased it yourself outright. If you just had the patience to save up the money, set aside the money, and just buy it outright yourself.
Sad not to bust your bubble, we've all been guilty of this because we bought our homes on this kind of installment. That's
right. And yeah, I'm going to get to that. So, with this example, this is a luxury item, right? We could all live without a TV. We could all live without, the best couch or whatever it is that we want right away. So, when it's possible, and I like to stress that, when it's possible, it's wiser just to wait and save up your own money, not get in debt, because this is a way of just getting in debt to someone. And by the way, with this rent-to-own setup, guess what? If you miss a payment or something, they just come and take it away. They take it back, and then all that money you paid is gone. So, and you only get to own it at the end.
I was thinking about all these at-home schooling that we're having to do today, and all these families having to have separate computers for their children. They have no choice. Most of them cannot. Now, some schools provide them.
I think some provide, but yeah.
But I'm thinking about how sad it is for families with several children, and they have to have more than one computer. And they have no choice.
Yeah. Yes, sir?
Well, instant gratification, of course, is where you're getting at, but my son was able to we went to the bank one time and borrowed money to buy him a truck. And I made sure I emphasized it to him right there when he signed the paperwork. You said it a minute ago. Until you paid that last penny, it is not yours. It's the bank's.
That's right. Yeah, you ever watch those shows where they go and repossess cars and people get real angry? It's not really yours until you pay it all the way off, yeah.
But I washed it.
Yeah, that's right. And, Lucy, brought up, again, this is, I think, just good advice. Again, if it's possible, try not to get into debt if you don't need to. And, there could be situations come up where you just have to buy things on credit. You have to go into debt. In my way of thinking, some exceptions would be like a house, right? Unless you're wealthy or inherited money or something, and you can just go up to the house and like, I'll pay you cash for your house today. Unless you're in that, if you're in that situation, awesome, great. But I think for most people, you have to get a mortgage, right? And kind of what Ron said. Have you ever looked? I don't know what the numbers are myself. I'd have to look. We buy a mortgage. We have a house. We pay a mortgage. And it's actually our mortgage. What we pay on our mortgage is actually cheaper than when we used to rent. renting, and we were living in Flowery Branch. It's more to rent than it is to pay a mortgage right now. Or at least it was. I don't know what the situation is now, but
It's always been that way.
yeah. And when you get a chance, look at if you pay a mortgage, look at your mortgage, and because I remember when we were signing, we had to sign our lives away, right? When you get that mortgage, and there's the owner in the room, there's a lawyer in the room, there was some other person in the room, and we're sitting there reading all this stuff, signing all this stuff, and the lawyer mentioned something. I forget the exact numbers he gave, but he said something like, if you pay $100 extra on your mortgage every month, you'll pay it off in 10 or 20 years sooner than the agreement. And I'm like, what? Like, how does that make sense? Well, it made sense when you started looking at the numbers, because when you pay that mortgage, the amount of money that actually goes to the principal, the money that you owe, it's like pretty small. Again, some numbers, some percentages change, but like what you pay in the mortgage, only a certain percentage goes to the actual principal. So that's the advice he gave me, and it's probably good advice. If you are in a situation where you could, add $100, a couple $100 to your mortgage payment, you can pay off your house a lot sooner. So again, are there exceptions? Yeah, I'd say a house is an exception. A car might be an exception, depending on what kind of car you drive. If you can set aside and save, and go buy, again, I'd recommend, this again, just advice, take it or leave it. I'd recommend buying a certified used car. Because if you, from a dealership, a respectable dealership, because if you go buy just a brand spanking new car, the minute you drive it off that parking lot, it loses like thousands of dollars of value just because it's new. So, we don't have a car payment because we were blessed. We used to drive a 4-door sedan, and then we started having kids, and then we're not all going to fit in this car anymore. We got to get something bigger. So we were blessed to, save some money, set some things aside. We went to a dealership, and we were able to buy the van that we now drive, just buy it outright. And so we've never had, car payment, and we don't have to worry about that. I know everyone can't do that, but if you can, again, you can avoid having a bill every month, and it's a nice feeling. So again, if you can, buy as many things just without getting in debt. And again, the advice that King Solomon gives here in verses 4 and 5, if you do get into debt, just be careful about it, be mindful about it. Credit cards and things like that, if they get out of control, they can bury you. I mean, it can be dangerous. So his advice is, get out of debt as quickly as you can, and just be mindful of what things you're agreeing to. Any questions, comments before we look at verses 6 and following? Yes, sir.
Unfortunately, I was raised by a banker. And so,
okay.
And then also through the Depression. So 2 sayings that I was raised with is, watch your pennies, your dollars will watch themselves. And then my dad had a saying, use it up, wear it out, make do or do without. TV, like say, well, I'd love to have a TV. If mine broke, I'd have to have TV tonight. No, you can read.
Yep.
You don't have to have a TV.
Mm-hmm.
You go to people's houses and the TV's on non-stop in 2 or 3 different rooms. And, wise.
Yep.
So, but those are 2 sayings I was raised with.
Yep. Yeah, that's good advice. You can't live without a TV. And, TV is just one expense. Usually it comes with several other too, right? You got to pay for some kind of, if you're going to watch it, right? You got to pay for some kind of cable or streaming service or something.
Can't watch Georgia Monday night without a TV.
There you go.
Unless you buy a ticket. Those tickets are a lot more expensive than the TV.
Yeah. Okay, so verses 6 and following, I titled this section here, Work Ethic. Verses 6 through following, Work Ethic. And according to verses 6 and following, what animal should we imitate? The ant, right? The humble ant. Those nasty little bugs. So in verse 7, he tells us that the ant does not have a boss, who assigns tasks and, tells them what to do. In verse 8, it speaks how, ants work during the productive months, spring and summer and so on. And they gather all their food for the winter time. And so what do you think are some of the lessons that we can learn from the ant?
Early to bed, early to rise, makes you healthy, wealthy, and wise.
There you go. Early to bed, early rise, healthy, wealthy, and wise. Yeah, that kind of sums it up, right? Any other thoughts?
Work in the summer, sleep in the winter.
There you go. Work in the summer, sleep in the winter, right?
Florida.
The Florida winter?
Do this.
Yeah. So we look at verse 7. 7 I'd sum up as motivation, self-motivation. That we would be benefited. Again, it's wise to have discipline, to have regarding business work, to have a healthy level of ambition, that you want to make a living for yourself, you want to provide for yourself, for your family, if you're blessed to have a family. So self-discipline or motivation would, I think, sum up verse 7. Verse 8, again, speaks about summer versus winter. We should prepare for the financial winters of life. And there's all kinds of, unexpected things that happen. A person might get laid off. You might run over a key in the middle of the road and blow out one of your tires, and you got to pay a couple $100 to get your tire replaced. You might have a roof leak. One of your kids might break their arm or something. So it's good to try and, have some money set aside for, an emergency. Have like an emergency fund. There's a financial guy, I don't know if you've ever heard of Dave Ramsey. He has, I have a book of his. He has many lessons, like video lessons you can listen to online. He's a financial guy. And his advice is to have a $1,000 emergency fund. Save up, have a $1,000 emergency fund. And when something like that happens, you get that money, you don't even got to think about it. Got that money, and then if you use it, stock it back up. Save it back up. So again, I see those two lessons here, those two major lessons. Again, being self-disciplined, having motivation, and verse 8, being prepared for difficulties in life, the unexpected things in life, the winters of life. Any questions, comments? Yes, ma'am?
When we were children, we grew up cooking. I mean, in the summertime, we had a garden. You put up all the stuff to get ready for the winter. I guess we don't do that anymore,
Yeah.
I'm sure, but.
Do a lot of like canning and stuff
Yeah, like
close to the
canning.
wintertime? I know some folks that still, I have an aunt who does that. She makes pickles and tomatoes and cans.
There's not, that is kind of a dying thing.
Yep. She makes some good pickles. I like her pickles.
I used to.
Yeah. Okay. Verses 9 through 11, we have some caution about being too lax. Caution about being too lax, verses 9 through 11. And there's balance, right? There's nothing wrong with having rest. And my mindset would be if you are working and putting forth what you believe is good effort, then you deserve those times of rest when you get them. But there's warnings here about being too restful, being too lax, verses 9 through 11. Now in the New Testament, occasionally Jesus touches upon finances, and he's almost always doing it to make teach something spiritual in nature, and that there's a spiritual idea in this whole context. But again, there is some practical information. I was recently watching a video where a man said, all the metaphors in the Bible and all the illustrations in the Bible, they only make sense because they're based on reality. And I think that's true for what Jesus says here about money, right? The things he said about money, the spiritual teachings he said about money, only make sense when you realize money is a real thing, part of everyday life. For example, Jesus says, "I'm the bread of life." Well, that only makes sense because bread is a real thing, right? People make bread, eat bread, especially in the ancient world, to survive day in and day out, making bread every day. And so when some guy comes along and says, "I'm the bread of life," that has powerful meaning because bread is a real thing. So here he talks about finances. He does make spiritual application. But again, the spiritual application only makes sense if we first look at what's real, what's in reality. So in Luke 16, verses 11 and 12, it says, if therefore, this is Jesus speaking, if ye therefore have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, this is King James, mammon here means wealth or riches, money is the idea, finances. Unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? Right? And so again, I'd say he's talking about ultimately heavenly riches and things like that. Again, this is a spiritual lesson. But again, it's based off of money. So unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? In verse 12 it says, if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? And so when we think about faithfulness, faithfulness is a good quality which relates to many things in life. Yes, when we think about our religion, when we think about worship, prayer, yes, faithfulness is involved in those things, but faithfulness also affects what we do with practical things in life, like our finances. And so here Jesus speaks about those who are not faithful in the unrighteous mammon. And this means we should be trustworthy, or we should be reliable concerning finances, business, just worldly things, everyday things of life. It's unavoidable. There's always going to be some kind of money that exists in the world, in every culture, every society, no matter where you go in the world. And so Jesus is saying we should be reliable, that we should be trustworthy in this area of life. And that faithfulness should carry over into our spirituality. So when we look at Proverbs 6, again, Proverbs 6 is about balance. Being too lax, too much sleep will bring you poverty. And I'm going to ask some questions here. I'm not looking for any answers. I ask the following questions just for your personal consideration and edification. Do you know where every dollar you own, do you know where every dollar is spent? Do you know where every dollar goes that you make? Or are things slipping through the cracks? Do you have a written budget? Do you know how much is spent on your utilities, your groceries, eating out, entertainment, anything else you can imagine? If you do pay interest on a home or an automobile or anything else, do you know how much of that money goes to the principal of what you actually owe, and how much of that is going to taxes and interest and other things that, again, you're not going to get back? And if you're coming up with some question marks in your mind, the good news is you can turn all that around today. You can make a budget today. You can make a plan today. And again, I think this is very practical, and maybe someone might say, well, this isn't spiritual or whatever. It is biblical, right? He's talking about our finances here. And, as your friend, as your minister, as your brother, I don't want to see anyone, anyone, but especially you, I don't want to see anyone struggling with finances if I can just give them a few things to help them out. And, you could turn things around. I don't want to see anyone, struggling with that, and again, that affecting your family life or affecting your worship on Sunday. These are things we should all think about. And again, it's just an unavoidable part of life. Yes, sir?
A minute ago you said, it doesn't matter what country you're in, money's always going to be involved. Money is part of life.
Yep.
And I've always had a thought that money is a tool, and it's like a knife,
yep,
or a gun or a shovel. It's a tool, and if you have the right attitude and control of that tool, it doesn't run your life. You run it. You're in control of that tool. The knife you can cut, the gun, everything's a tool, and money is a tool unless it's your everything.
Yep. And with a knife or something like that, tools can be dangerous if you're not keeping your eye on them and using them the right way. You get a nasty cut with a knife if you're cutting towards yourself or something and you slip, or I heard, I don't know if it's true, it's just something I heard, that most of the emergency room visits are because people are holding a piece of bread or a bagel or something, then they're cutting towards the this spot in your hand, and they go through and they end up cutting their hand open, you know. You got to be careful. And again, money is something that we should be careful with. So again, the good news is, if anyone, again, I'm not looking for any answers or anything, but if you do have question marks about your finances, you know, you can, and especially with today's technology, you can get your bank statement. You can track where things are going and begin to, you know, you can make a budget, you can write that stuff down, and, you know, if things are slipping through the cracks, you can fix that today.
Well, Seth, in Luke, at the end of 13, verse 13, it says, you can't serve God and your wealth. And I think that's what, you know, even King Solomon,
Yeah.
you know, we know he loved his riches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the end of the day, he could not serve God and his money. So money, you know, so there's got to be a balance between, God doesn't want us to not be successful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with being wealthy, correct?
Yeah.
He doesn't want us to live, I mean, we talked about it last week, he doesn't want us to live in poverty, because that's not what he wants. He wants us to be successful, but that we got to be responsible with that wealth. We got to put it where it needs to be, give it to God, you know, do what we need to with it. And God will keep blessing us, you know. But to continue going in debt to look like Joneses or whoever, that's serving God. That's serving wealth. That's not serving God.
Yeah.
You know.
That's right. I think that's well said. Yes, sir?
You know, something that you might want to touch on too is including our thinking on giving. You know, when we're planning for houses and cars and stuff like that, that we need to keep in mind our responsibility in putting the Lord first in our giving.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good comment. Yeah, you know, giving is part of worship. You know, we're asked to give as we prosper. And if giving is like the last thing on our mind, that's not the kind of giving God wants. You know, He wants us to give our best. That's a good comment. So we'll come back to this. Let me quickly say a few things here. And I put this handout, if everyone's got it. It's just a simple budget. And I know there's other budgets that exist. There's apps and computer programs that exist. This is just, you know, a good starting place. And feel free, I just made this myself. You can take it, copy it. If you want a digital copy, I put this in Windows Excel. If you use Windows Excel, I can send you a digital copy. You can add, take things out. Feel free to use this any way you want. There's a saying, those who fail to plan, plan to fail. Those who fail to plan, plan to fail. And, you know, here we find a biblical example of that in Luke 14. You know, Jesus talks about, you know, the person who begins to build a tower, and they first don't, you know, sit down and count the costs, and they start to build, and this tower gets halfway made, and they run out of money. And Jesus talks about how people begin to mock the person because they start building this thing and then didn't have the funds to finish it. So those who fail to plan, plan to fail. Another little quote, if you're interested. If you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. If you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. And so, you know, having just a written down record of your finances, it's a way for you to be aiming at something. That's all it is. It's a way for you to know where your money is going. And we'll come back, we'll talk more about this next week, but if you look at just the bottom, and bring this back next week, we'll talk about this a little bit more next week, but if you look at the very bottom of this handout where it says totals, in the highlighted gray section, and if that highlighted gray section at the very bottom says totals, you got your total income, and you fill in the blank, and then you got your total expenses. So again, you got to know where your money is going to fill in that blank. And you subtract your total expenses from your total income. And, you know, if you don't like that number, or if the number's in the negative, you know, you can fix it, you know. You can fix it. And you're the only person who fixes it, right? You know, someone can give you advice, but it's just advice until you actually use it, right? And there's a section here. I mean, if you have a plan and a purpose with your money, you can better decide what goes where. And like what John mentioned, I have it on there as charity. It's kind of in the middle. If you look at the section that says expenses, you know, when you know where your money's going, you can plan better for charity and your giving and, you know, anything else in life. You know, if you want to go on vacation, you can begin planning better and, you know, setting money aside, you know, to go on a vacation or whatever it is. All right. Any final questions, comments? I think I saw a hand back here. Yes, sir.
Well, the other part of that is if you're married, and I preach to a lot of the children I have at work and at home, that your spouse and you are a team. You're equally yoked, so to speak, and you know you need to be, the money and your goals need to be, like I say, this budget's good. If you're worried about it, the other one's out not being part of the team. And you know, you both are a team working together, and this should be a goal and discussed, and this should be your life. It's just something else you're responsible for.
Yeah, that's a great thought, and I agree with that 100%. If you're married, it is way more important that you can literally be on the same page with your spouse. So, because I mean, otherwise, you know, one spouse is doing their own thing, the other spouse is doing their own thing, and you know, who knows where the money's going, right? So, I mean, that's great advice. You know, if you're married, I'd say it's even more important to have, you know, for both of you to, you know what's going on together. All right, that was the final bell. We'll come back. We'll visit this again next week. Hold on to those handouts. I appreciate everyone's thoughts and comments this morning. Thank you very much.